My parents called me a burden while living on the money I send them. Your brother is better, they satire, so I cut them off and evicted them. Thanksgiving was always awkward in my family, but that year it became something altogether else. My name is Daniel. I am 29 years old and have kept quiet for the majority of my adult life. I've always been the quiet, helpful one who doesn't ask for much, just stayed in the background and completed the tasks at hand. Perhaps that was my error. I suppose when people become accustomed to you being invisible, they begin to believe you are not truly present. Growing up, my brother Chris was the golden boy. He was a star quarterback in high school, received a college scholarship, and earned a business degree. My parents, particularly my mother, would light up whenever he entered a room. "That's my boy," she'd say, beaming like she was proclaiming royalty. Meanwhile, I was okay. I was just Daniel. I got good grades, kept to myself, found a job right out of college, and gradually began to establish a life. Nothing showy, simply solid. But somehow, none of that seemed to count. The real kicker was that I was quietly keeping everything afloat. My father had a health crisis around 3 years ago and had to cut back on work. Of course, the invoices continued to arrive, so I stepped up and began paying the mortgage, utilities, and some of the medical expenses. It was never meant to be permanent, just something I could do to help. You know, family takes care of one another. Or so I thought. However, the longer I assisted, the less they seemed to notice. Or perhaps they observed and assumed it was owing to them. Chris never offered a cent. He'd arrive on vacation in his newest suit, raving about a conference he'd flown to in Dubai or Toronto. Mom fawned over his every word, as if he were some business messiah. Dad would simply nod along, sipping his whiskey and seldom saying much. And I'd usually be in the kitchen, checking the oven, bringing out dishes, and assisting with cleanup. Following then, Thanksgiving began like all others. I arrived early to help Mom prepare, despite the fact that she hardly recognized me when I walked in. "The potatoes need mashing," she murmured as a hello. "There are no hugs or smiles, only directions." I nodded, as usual, and began to work. Chris arrived an hour later with a bottle of wine and a new girlfriend, Emily, who appeared to be barely of drinking age. Everyone oohed and ahed over her while I prepared the table, unnoticed in plain sight. Dinner was the usual ritual, with Mom gushing about Chris's latest major moves and Chris acting as if he invented the concept of labor. Emily laughed loudly at every of his forced jokes, while I sat there carving my turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, chewing slowly and remaining silent until the discussion changed. It began with something innocuous. Mom commented that it must be pleasant to live alone, meaning that I had it easy. I made a small joke saying something like, "Yeah, the mortgage fairy sure helps with that," just trying to brush it off. But then she gave me this cold and sharp look and said, "You know, Daniel, you've always acted like you're doing us a huge favor. You're not. You're just a burden. Always have been." The entire table fell silent for half a second. I really blinked, certain I had misheard her. But before I could respond, Chris chuckled, shook his head and said, "At least I make this family proud." There it was. That line was a stomach hit. Something about the way he said it made me feel as if it were a commonly accepted fact that I should already know and accept. It just made something in me stay still. I slowly set down my fork, pushed back my chair, and stood up. I didn't say anything, throw a fit, or even look at any of them. I stepped out, grabbed my coat, got into my car, and drove home. I recall the drive being strangely silent. I did not even turn on the radio. My phone buzzed once or twice, most likely from Mom asking where I went or Emily wanting to make things right. I did not check. I simply drove in solitude, parked, walked inside, and sat on my couch for a long time, pondering. I reflected on every payment I had paid, every quiet sacrifice I had made, and every time I had been there for them when they needed it. Transportation, groceries, and last-minute repairs. I thought about how I had never been appreciated. No one had remarked, "We appreciate you." Instead, I was considered a burden after peeling potatoes for 6 hours and covering their mortgage again. For a while, I didn't know what to do. I was angry. Yeah. More than that, I felt numb. I feel like I just realized something I should have understood a long time ago. They did not see me as a member of the family. They saw me as a tool, a utility, a wallet on legs. So I went cold turkey. There are no further payments. No more quiet assistance. No longer becoming the family's doormat. I did not send a message. I did not explain. I just let everything go. I turned off the automatic payment. I deleted the bill reminders from my calendar and carried on with my life. Weeks have passed. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dad. He never actually phoned me. Even as a child, he preferred to delegate most tasks to his mother. So, when I saw his name come up, I hesitated but responded. "Hey Dad," I said. His voice sounded tight and irritated. "Daniel," he answered. "Why is the mortgage unpaid?" I asked without pausing. I simply sat back in my chair and remarked, "Ask your pride and joy." I then hung up. And that's when things started to unravel. The stillness following the call was both deafening and telling. Nobody reached out. Not Mom. Not Chris. Not even a half-hearted, "Hey, are you okay?" It was as if they expected me to retreat the instant the consequences hit. As if my absence had been nothing more than a tantrum. Temporary. They did not comprehend yet, but they will. One day after Dad called, Mom texted me. No greeting, no context. Simply, "We need you to sort out the mortgage before it affects our credit. Don't be childish." Harsh. That is the word she picked. No. We apologize. Not let's discuss. Just a simple command. Chilly and clipped. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering. I could have said a lot. I could have poured out years of resentment in one long message, but I didn't. I set it to read and put my phone down. If they wanted to believe I was a cog in their machine, that's okay. Let's see how they do without me. The fallout was slower than I imagined, but it arrived. I began hearing about things from my extended relatives, particularly my cousin Audrey, who lived a few blocks away. She called me one night, nervously laughing. Just a heads up. Your mom's been telling people you've been going through something, that you're not well lately." My stomach dropped. "Not well," I reiterated. "Yeah," she said slowly. "Mental health stuff. Saying you're having some kind of breakdown. That you're unstable, lashing out." I obviously didn't believe it. But she's spinning this story as if you're off the track. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly. There it was. Classic deflection. Instead of confronting the truth, they were rewriting things, portraying me as the problem, making it appear as if I had snapped, that I was untrustworthy, unstable. It was simpler than acknowledging they had leaned too hard for too long, eventually breaking the one individual who held the family together. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it stung anyway. What truly grabbed me was how they handled Christmas. It has always been at my house during the last few years, largely because I had the space and patience. I decorated, cooked supper, and purchased thoughtful gifts. Even when money was tight, I made it feel worthwhile. But that year, I did not invite them. I didn't say anything. I assumed they would get the message. Instead, they organized their own meeting without informing me, and shared a slew of happy group images on Facebook. Chris smiles next to Mom. Emily is enjoying a glass of wine by the tree. I purchased them last year. The title read, "Grateful for Family." Some people may leave, but the ones who matter always stick together. It impacted harder than I anticipated. I wasn't even upset at first. I just felt hollow, like if I had been entirely ripped out. They did not miss me. They just patched up the gap I left and went going. However, the Fishers appeared shortly after. Audrey contacted again around mid-January. "You're not going to believe this," she stated. "Chris is in trouble." I raised my eyebrow. "What kind of trouble?" "He quit his job." I blink. "Why?" "He says he's starting his own thing. Some consulting business or something, but rumor is he got pushed out. Misused company funds or something shady. Nobody's saying the full story." This caught me off surprise. Chris had always been the golden child, although he wasn't very responsible. He enjoyed appearances, fine automobiles, showy watches, and stylish outfits. I'd been wondering for years how he maintained his lifestyle without it catching up with him. Now it sounded like it had finally happened. I didn't say anything to Audrey at the time, but a faint idea crossed my mind. They'll come knocking again. And they did. It began with a lengthy note from Mom. Unusually sweet, and almost theatrical. "Hey honey, I know things have been tense, but family is forever. We all say things we don't mean sometimes. Can we talk? Maybe have dinner soon. I'll make that roast you like." My response was silent. One day later, another note arrived. "This one's from Dad." Clipped again. "We're going through a rough patch. Mortgage is 1 month behind now. Your mother's upset. Can you please help us out? Just this once." I stared at my screen and chuckled. Just this once. I had been helping out discreetly for years, without appreciation or credit. And now, after being labeled a burden and dismissed like a bitter shame, they want me to step in again, just this time. What struck me most was how little they appeared to realize what they had done. For them, I was still the backup plan, the quiet one, the assistance. They didn't comprehend that the silence was not transitory and that I would not be returning. They continued to press. Chris called one night. I did not answer, so he left a voicemail. I listened to it twice, just to make sure I heard what I thought I did. Hey Daniel, look, I know things got out of hand, but you've always been good with money. And I've got this business idea that could really take off. I just need a little startup capital. Thought maybe you'd want in on the ground floor, like an investment. Win-win, you know. I sat in startled silence. It was not even an apology. Not a genuine one, just a pitch. As if I were a venture capitalist, not his brother. As if he hadn't laughed in my face throughout Thanksgiving, while I quietly borne the burden of his parents' financial security. Something in me changed following that call. I had remained quiet, but it wasn't only about the pain anymore. It was about clarity. I saw them for who they were, and more significantly, what I wasn't to them. I wasn't family. I was a resource. And after I stopped being useful, they altered the story to make me the problem. But now, I wasn't finished. I was done playing nice. And that's when I started making plans. I did not rush the strategy. I am not the theatrical type. I've never been the type to yell, toss things, storm out, or demand that people recognize my worth. No, I favored quiet entrances and steps, allowing the quietness to speak for itself. However, when someone attempts to turn you into a villain just because you have finally stopped bleeding for them, it pierces harder. You begin to realize that quiet is insufficient. Not this time. The treachery, which changed everything, occurred roughly a week after Chris's voicemail. I was at work sitting at my desk, reviewing reports when I received a call from an unknown number. I was about to let it ring out when something told me to pick it up. The voice asked, "Daniel Miller." Male, courteous but stern. Speaking. "This is David Harris from Lakeshore Lending. We're phoning to follow up on your recent mortgage application." I froze. "I'm sorry." "Which application?" The man stopped. I heard a rustling of paper. "This is the application for a new loan at 324 Linton Avenue, submitted on January 11th. That's your listed address." "Yes." I slowly sat back in my chair, the air thick around me. That was my address. My residence. "Hold on," I murmured, attempting to keep my voice steady. "I didn't submit any application." There is further stillness. Then David inquired carefully, "You didn't authorize Chris Harris as a co-signer on this application?" My stomach churned. "No, I did not. I asked him to send over the documentation. He agreed." I hung up and sat startled, staring at my desk without blinking. 10 minutes later, the email arrived in my mailbox. A scanned PDF file was attached. When I opened it, my name and information were all over the loan documents, alongside Chris's counterfeit signature and income statement. He even entered my banking information. Accounts I had not shared with anyone in years. Most insulting of all, the planned use of funds box had been marked as funding for a family business enterprise. I saw red. He wasn't just trying to take advantage of my generosity, he attempted to take from me. He attempted to sell my house to fund a failed scheme, the same house that I worked hard to afford, the same house they conveniently forgot about when they termed me a burden. It was as if years of being disregarded, dismissed and exploited were condensed into a single moment. It was as if every time I let something slip, every time I swallowed my pride and did what they asked, I was brought to this point of treachery. I did not cry. I did not panic. I just sat there, still numb. The sensation you get after an automobile accident when your body is all right, but your mind hasn't caught up yet. Then I carefully opened a new browser tab. I began by sending an email to my lawyer, AITA, whom I had previously worked with a few years ago. I wasn't sure if she'd take a personal case, but I lay everything out. Forged documents, bank information, and unlawful loan applications. I emailed the PDF. I've included screenshots. I added Chris's voicemail. Within 20 minutes, she had responded. "I can help. First step is locking down your credit. Second step is reporting this to the authorities. Third step is deciding how loud you want to be." The last line remained with me. How loud would I like to be? I'd spent my entire life being quiet, avoiding confrontation, and choosing peace over conflict. But now they had gone too far. Chris had tried to put me in debt without asking. My parents had portrayed me as unstable to conceal their own negligence. And when I stopped providing, no one asked why. They simply demanded more. No, this time I would be loud. I would be undeniable. I did not respond to anyone that weekend. I didn't respond texts or pick up the phone. I spent the entire afternoon sorting through old receipts, bank data, and emails. I created a timeline, every payment I had paid for my parents, every mortgage deposit, and every expense I had incurred. I labeled, dated, and placed them into a neat folder. I wanted a paper trail so clean it could cut through glass. Monday morning, I filed a police report for attempted identity theft and fraud. I handed everything over to Arya, who drafted a cease and desist letter for Chris, thereby prohibiting him from using or accessing any of my bank records or personal information. She also included a language that protects my home from any further activity without my clear written consent. For good measure, I froze all of my credit accounts, changed every password, and enabled two-factor authentication on everything. Chris was not going near anything I owned again. 3 days later, Chris called me. This time, I responded. "Daniel," he said as if we were longtime friends. "Hey, listen. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Save it," I told him. "What?" "I know what you did. I have the documents. The bank called me directly. I've already filed the report, and you'll be hearing from my lawyer." There was a pause, followed by a nervous laugh. "Dude, come on. It wasn't like that. I needed a little help, man. I figured we'd both benefit. It's not like I was going to mess you over or anything." "You already did," I replied bluntly. "You just didn't expect to get caught." "Okay, look," he continued, his tone changing quickly. "Let's just be real for a second. All right, you've always had help, you live alone, no kids, no real responsibilities. You can afford to float some cash. I'm trying to build something. You're just sitting there. Why not do something that actually matters for once?" That's when I realized he actually believed it. He wasn't simply manipulative. He truly believed that he was entitled to my life, money, and home since he was more important in his view. I was merely the silent one, the supporting character, the backup plan. I hung up without saying another thing. That was when the real trouble began. The days that followed were some of the most difficult I'd had in years. Not due to what Chris did. By then, I had already secured everything. I was not in danger of losing my home, and my finances were secure. No. The true weight came from something deeper and colder. I had no idea how much I still wanted to believe my family would come around. That maybe after everything, they'd realize what they'd done. Perhaps they would apologize. Maybe I'd hear my father say something, anything about how awful it was and how far things had progressed. But the stillness revealed everything I needed to know. Nobody contacted to find out what had really transpired. Nobody went out to say, "We're sorry Chris did that." Instead, they doubled down. Audrey called again, her voice tight and low as if she didn't want to be heard. "Daniel, just so you know, your mom's telling everyone you're trying to get Chris arrested," she said. "You're making it all up to get back at the family." I didn't even reply. I just stood there in my living room, holding my phone and looked out the window. It was a dreary, overcast day, one of those afternoons when everything feels as if it's on hold. But something inside of me had utterly deflated. They weren't simply excusing Chris. They were portraying me as the villain again because it was simpler than admitting they had failed me. It was easier than confessing they had used me as a crutch for years and booted me when I stopped walking for them. I began skipping meals, not on purpose. I would simply lose track of time and then discover it was 10 p.m. I hadn't eaten anything all day. My sleep became uneven. Some nights, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, recalling every Thanksgiving, birthday, and occasion I'd smiled through pain just to preserve the peace. The thing that broke me was not even a dramatic event. It was Wednesday morning. I opened the fridge, saw a half-empty carton of eggs and old bread, and realized I lacked the energy to cook anything. So I sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, and looked at nothing for nearly an hour. That was my lowest point. My calm rock bottom. No screaming or yelling, just emptiness. I didn't seek vengeance in that moment. I didn't even desire closure. I just wanted to stop caring. I wanted to let go of the desire for their acceptance, to understand that it would never come, and that nothing I accomplished would ever be enough for them since they never wanted me to succeed. They simply wanted me to remain in place. Useful, invisible, and silent. The following day, I did something I had not done in a long time. I packed a backpack, got into my car, and drove to the lake. There's a small home out there, nestled among tall pines with a crooked little pier that creaks when you walk on it. It once belonged to my granddad. He left it to me after he died, most likely because I was the only person who ever visited him. I hadn't gone out there in almost 2 years. There is no cell service or noise, only wind and water and the sound of birds slashing through the trees. I stayed for 3 days, Didn't tell anyone, and didn't bring my laptop, just a notepad, some books, and a thermos full of coffee. I sat by the lake, strolled the trails, and allowed my mind to calm before the concept began to take shape, almost without effort, not one of vengeance, but of freedom. I'd been clutching onto the idea of family for so long, like if I simply proved myself enough, they'd notice me, love me, and be proud. But that kind of family did not exist, at least not for them. So I began thinking about how to go away, not out of spite, but out of need. When I returned home, I started making modifications. First, I removed my name from everything related to my parents. There are no longer emergency contacts, shared financial accounts, or anything else that could connect me to them. I contacted the bank to ensure that any future joint applications or requests under my name were identified. I also provided AITA, my lawyer, the power of attorney to act on my behalf in any relevant circumstances. She was delighted to assist, especially now that things were escalating. Then I quietly started looking into job transfers. My company had branches outside of the state, one in Oregon and one in Colorado. I haven't told anyone yet. I just wanted to experience what it would be like to start over. To live somewhere where no one recognized me as the disappointing son or background brother. I didn't rush it. I wasn't making a major announcement, but for the first time, I felt like I was creating something for myself. Still, as I prepared to leave them behind, I knew it couldn't end this way. Not entirely. Not until the truth comes out. Because they were still telling everyone I was unstable. That I was the problem. That I had abandoned my poor, struggling family despite everything they had done for me. And I couldn't let that deception continue. So I waited. I remained quiet. But, behind the scenes, I was planning the final move. Because they would eventually take another step too far. When they tried something new, I would be prepared. It did not happen overnight. But gradually, I began to rebuild my life. Only this time, I was creating it on my own terms. No guilt, no responsibility, simply quiet, careful decisions for me, and no one else. The first significant shift came from work. For the previous 5 years, I had worked as a project analyst for a logistics business. I enjoyed it enough, but I'd never asked for more. I always kept my head down. Always accepted extra assignments without complaint, exactly like I did at home. But, after everything that had transpired, something inside me clicked. I stopped waiting for others to acknowledge my work and began speaking out. During a team meeting, I presented a new customer retention model that I had been developing in my spare time for months. Our regional manager adored it. Within a few weeks, I had presented it to the executive team. A month later, they offered me a position at their new office in Portland, Oregon, with a higher title, income, and, best of all, a relocation package. I did not say yes right away, not because I was disinterested. I was. But I needed to know I was doing it for the right reasons. I spent the weekend strolling around my apartment, feeling every drawer, photo frame, every silent reminder of who I once was. The son who paid and stayed, hoping for some token of thanks that never arrived. By Sunday night, I had opened my laptop, drafted the acceptance email, and clicked submit. I suddenly had a new beginning. I sold my house in 3 weeks. It sold above the asking price. The market was hot, and I'd taken better care of it than others. I didn't notify my parents I was moving. Not that it mattered. The only communication I'd received from them since the fraud event was a vague, passive-aggressive voicemail from Mom. I hope you're happy now. Your father's blood pressure has been through the roof and we'll just have to figure things out without you. I deleted it without answering. The movement itself felt weird, as if I were shedding flesh. The drive along the coast was long, yet strangely serene. 600 miles of fresh air and far from everything that used to weigh me down. The Portland office was sleek, bright, and full of individuals who knew nothing about my background. I was not the silent one here. I was the man who created the retention strategy that saved the company $1 million in the second quarter. People asked for my opinion. My manager kept me updated on high-level meetings. I began mentoring new hires. For the first time in my adult life, I felt understood. And with visibility came leverage. I established a side venture, something I had been thinking about for a long. I created a website to assist small businesses in automating their delivery operations by utilizing simplified technologies that I developed over time. I didn't expect much from it, but within 6 months, I had a dozen clients and more than enough extra cash to feel the weight of financial anxiety lifted completely from my shoulders. I joined a hiking group, began seeing a therapist, and took a pottery class, of all things. I was not attempting to find myself, I was just giving myself permission to be more than what my family taught me I was. With each stride, my confidence increased. But so did my lucidity. The pattern became more clear as I distanced myself. My parents were not simply poisonous. They relied on controlling the story. As long as I remained silent, they could portray themselves as loving, selfless parents who were being mistreated by their ungrateful son. Chris was a success story. I was the failure who became odd and distant. But they had no idea and couldn't have predicted that I had been chronicling everything. Emails, voicemails, bank statements and text messages are all neatly arranged in one cloud folder. And with my lawyer's assistance, I filed a legal lawsuit for attempted fraud and identity theft. It was slow-moving legal stuff, as it always is. But it was real. Chris would finally get served. But that wasn't even the most exciting part for me anymore. No, what I was actually waiting for was the time they'd try to entice me back in, which they would. People like that always do. They'd wait till the financial crisis struck again. Until Chris's next major venture collapsed. Until father's blood pressure became more than a voicemail weapon. Then they'd reach out with sweet apologies and desperate charm. And this time, I wouldn't simply ignore them. This time, I'd respond, but not as the silent son they used to count on. Not as a fallback strategy. I'd respond as the man who no longer needed them, who had risen from the ashes and stood taller than they could have imagined. And I wouldn't simply walk away. I'd burn the bridge they'd built. But first I waited. And while I waited, I grew stronger. Because sometimes the finest retaliation isn't what you do but who you become. And I was becoming someone they couldn't identify or control. They had no idea what would happen next. The opportunity came in early spring. Not with a boom, but with a little email buried among a mound of spam. The subject line said, "Harris Family Mortgage, Urgent Inquiry." At first I assumed it was rubbish. I nearly deleted it. But then I noticed the sender, an assistant manager from a tiny regional bank near home. That caught my interest. I opened it, read it twice, and leaned back in my chair, silently startled. The message was short. It stated that a delinquency had been reported on a property with which I was previously affiliated, and that they were contacting me because my name was mentioned as a previous financial donor to the account. The address was familiar. My parents' house. The same one I'd been paying my mortgage on for years. The same one that I stopped paying after Thanksgiving. I called the bank personally. The woman who responded, pleasant but clearly overworked, confirmed my suspicions. The home was under pre-foreclosure. Payments had not been made in over 3 months. The balance had increased due to late fees. She inquired whether I intended to assist in getting the debt current. I grinned and answered, "No, but I might be able to help in another way." That email was more than simply a warning. It was a window. They attempted to build the wall without me, resulting in a minor crack. And behind it, I could see everything beginning to crumble. I contacted AITA the same day. She checked the public records and confirmed that the foreclosure notice had been filed. Even better, the bank had sent several alerts, indicating that the clock was ticking. The property would be put up for auction within 45 days. And that's when it clicked. They were going to lose their house. They always said that the house would be passed down to Chris one day. The house mom once referred to us as her legacy. The house I kept afloat for years while they treated me like a live-in ATM with no emotional worth. And now it was going to be taken, unless someone stepped in, or someone purchased it. That's when the notion really took off. It began as a flicker, a small notion, a quiet what if, but as I reflected on it, I realized it was no longer about vengeance. Not exactly. It was about finding closure, about reclaiming something they'd constantly held over me like a trophy I'd never deserve. And this time, I would not simply earn it. I would own it. I had the means. With my new salary and the constant revenue from my side business, I was in the best financial position I'd ever been in. I contacted a realtor friend in Portland, explained the situation, and asked if she might help me quietly follow the foreclosure process. She was intrigued, perhaps a little concerned, but consented. I dug deeper. Audrey, bless her soul, is still in touch. She didn't realize the whole scope of things. I did not want to draw her into anything, but she knew just enough to keep me informed. One night she called and told me something that brought the entire picture into perspective. "So, Chris is back living with your parents." She stated that his startup was no longer active. Emily left. He apparently borrowed money from everyone. Friends, former co-workers, even mom and dad. "They're broke, Daniel." I leaned back in my chair and nodded softly. "Are they selling anything?" "Not yet. But your mom was at church last weekend whispering about needing a miracle. Whatever that means." I thanked her, hung up and sat in silence for a long time. It was time. I called a local investment firm that specializes in buying distressed buildings. I didn't use my name, but rather a shell LLC that I had set up months before for tax purposes. AITA assisted with the paperwork. The plan was straightforward. When the house went up for auction, my gang would bid secretly and silently, and when the dust settled, I'd be the new owner. But it was not all. As I placed the pieces into place, another document emerged, one that I had almost forgotten about. A notarized statement I had written years ago when I first began assisting with the mortgage. It listed my financial contributions, signed by my parents, and acknowledged that I had covered over $85,000 in payments and repairs as a show of goodwill and support. AITA examined it and grinned. If they ever contest your purchase or try to claim the property was unjustly taken, this will bury them. It wasn't simply a receipt. It was protection, leverage, and confirmation that I wasn't an estranged son attempting to seize the family home. I was the one who saved it, until they turned against me. Now I was merely retrieving what they had thrown away. I took the last step. I planned to fly back home a week before the auction. Not to create drama, but to be there, to watch, and to witness with my own eyes the moment they learned their golden kid would not be the one to save them. I was done being quiet this time. I wasn't simply going away. I was walking back in on my own terms, and they wouldn't see it coming. The flight home seemed unreal. It had been over a year since I packed my belongings and drove 600 miles north, promising I would never look back. Now here I was, sitting by the window of a half-empty plane, watching the city I had outgrown fade back into view. But I wasn't the man they remembered, and I wasn't returning to make amends. The auction was planned for 10 a.m. on a Thursday morning. A small courthouse event, nothing glamorous, just rows of stiff chairs, a wooden podium, and a bank-appointed auctioneer going through a list of properties like he was reading from an overdue library book. I arrived early, dressed neatly in black pants, an ironed shirt, and a blazer, unassuming yet sharp. I sat in the back, quiet and undetected. The bidding started slowly. I waited. When the house came up for sale, 4,131 Willow Bend Lane, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, the same one I'd covered for years, the auctioneer scarcely lifted his voice. Beginning at $250,000. "Do I hear 250? Asked one bidder, raising his hand. A woman I didn't recognize, possibly a flipper. "Do I hear 255? My agent, who I sent in under the LLC, lifted her paddle. "Come, confident. 255. "Thank you. "Do I hear 260? A new bidder entered. Then it became a gentle back and forth. There were a few nods and responses, but no drama until 270 hit. That's when the other bidders backed off. The room became quiet again. 270 went once, twice, and sold. The gavel came down. It was all mine right away. My residence. Or at least the house that I paid for. They claimed that the house had never been mine. They said the house would be Chris's because he would have a family one day. That house now belonged to my LLC, and they had no idea. I did not show up to the residence that day. I was not searching for a confrontation. Not yet. I wanted the paperwork completed first, with the deed transferred, the locks changed, and everything buttoned up and neat. That took approximately 9 days. For 9 days, I remained in a quiet hotel just outside town, wandering by the lake, sipping black coffee in the mornings, and sleeping as I hadn't in years. 9 days passed while the storm silently brewed in their lives. Audrey texted me on day 7. "Chris is freaking out. Got some notice taped to the front door. Your mom ripped it off, but she's been crying ever since. They don't know what's happening. They thought they had more time." I never replied. On day 10 the sheriff served the final notice to vacate. And that night, I went to the house, not to brag. Not yet. Only to look. I parked across the street, motor turned off, headlights lowered. It was dark outside but late enough that the neighborhood was calm. The porch light was still on. Through the front window, I could see my mother seated at the kitchen table, shoulders bent, hand wrapped around a mug as if it could hold her. Chris stood behind her and paced. My father sat stiff and silent, appearing older than I remembered. I regarded them as if they were strangers, which they were now. They had no idea they were seated at my house. My property manager handed me the last document, a formal notice of ownership and desire to renovate the home, which took effect immediately. My lawyer had painstakingly crafted a tailored letter for me. It stated, "This property is now under new ownership. All prior occupants must vacate by Friday. There will be no further extensions or exceptions. We recommend securing alternate housing immediately." I signed it, not as Daniel, but as the managing partner of the LLC. I didn't intend to see them, but fate or karma had other plans. The next day, I was heading out of a downtown bakery when I noticed them. All three of them. Mom, Dad, and Chris stood outside a bank across the street, huddled together like a storm-battered flock. Mom appeared pale and anxious. Dad rubbed his forehead. Chris was on the phone, barking into it while red-faced. I'm not sure if it was the bank denying them another loan or the landlord of the rental they were pleading for, but they were absolutely untethered. For the first time, they appeared to be out of place. I remained across the street. I didn't wave. I did not approach. But I did make eye contact with my mom. She froze for a long second when she spotted me. Her lips parted, as if she was about to say something, but she did not. She just looked, as if she wasn't sure if I was real, or some ghost from the past who'd never expected to return with power. I kept her stare, gave her a slight nod, and then turned to walk away. That night, I received a text. It came from an unknown number, but I recognized the tone right away. Why are you doing this to us? We're still your family. I didn't respond immediately away. I let it sit. Then, after a full day, I responded, no, you were my family. And you demonstrated what it meant to you. This is me. Finally listening. They never replied. They left one day later. No forwarding address. No farewell. The house was unoccupied. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest. I walked through the empty house the next week. It was disturbingly quiet. The kind of silence that sticks to walls after years of commotion and memories. But this time, the silence wasn't painful. It felt fresh, like the end of something heavy. The kitchen still had a slight aroma of cinnamon and stale coffee. They took what they could, despite the fact that all of the furniture was gone. The table, the poor paintings on the walls, and the ancient rocker in the living room where Dad would fall asleep every night. They did, however, leave behind the photographs. Chris's school portraits have faded. Graduation photos. A family Christmas photo from 15 years ago in which I was somewhat cut off on the edge of the frame. I discovered a dusty shoebox in the back of a closet with my name on it. Inside were childish drawings, some old report cards, and a wrinkled thank you note I wrote to my mother in 3rd grade after she packed my favorite lunch. Apparently, she had retained it. Or maybe she simply forgot it was there. I did not take it with me. I left it in the box because that version of myself, the one who wanted their love and strove to earn a seat at the table by paying bills and swallowing insults, no longer lived here. I closed the box and shut the door. Word got around. I did not spread it. I did not need to. This village relied on whispers and backyard fences, and it didn't take long for people to figure out what had happened. Audrey told me that my mother began telling others that I had fooled them and stolen the house when they were vulnerable. However, the truth was supported by receipts, bank statements, and court filings, as well as a paper trail that cut through every falsehood they attempted to concoct. And the best part? It wasn't just about the house anymore. Chris's fraud case has moved forward. The faked loan paperwork, as well as the attempted identity theft, caught up with him. My lawyer reported everything to the authorities. The investigation was discreet, but comprehensive. Several months later, I received a communication from the county clerk's office. Chris had accepted a plea agreement, penalties, probation, and a permanent mark on his record. Nothing dramatic, no orange jumpsuits or breaking news, yet it would follow him throughout his career. The golden lad had now understood what it meant to fall. My parents relocated out of state to live with one of my mother's relatives, sharing a small apartment with another family member. Audrey stated that they hated it. There's no privacy, no control, and no platform to stand on. They attempted to reach out once again. An envelope addressed to my new address, handwritten and appealing for reconciliation. I did not open it. I shredded it without reading a word since forgiveness is not owed. It's earned, and they never attempted to earn it once. 6 months later, the house was completely renovated. I did not move back in. I converted it into a transitional house for young adults leaving foster care who needed a safe start. I teamed with a local nonprofit, established a trust in my grandfather's name, and quietly began funding it with the proceeds from my burgeoning business. That home had once been a symbol of power, shame, and who they thought deserved what. It was a second opportunity for someone who had never had one. I went once late in the evening, after the new residents had moved in. The porch light was on. Laughter rang out through the windows. Warm, living, and real. I paused on the curb, taking a big breath. Then I smiled. Because the house no longer reflected their legacy. It carried mine. And I created it using everything they attempted to take from me.